Hey friends, welcome to episode 544 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, joined this week by Chad Smart, once again, my WrestleMania travel partner, my travel buddy, but not this year. We are recording this, full disclosure, on Friday afternoon, a day before night one, and of course, 2 days before night two. So the show must go on, as they say, and typically with WrestleMania, unless we're there, we record a show that's kind of WrestleMania adjacent, but not specific to that year's Mania. Chad, what do you think? Are we waking up Monday morning? Is Cody Rhodes champion still, or is it John Cena?
I was going to say, we're going to go through and record options for every match for win or lose, and then you can just all edit it together Sunday night, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, make us look like geniuses for predicting, getting all the predictions correct for Mania. I mean, before we get into WrestleMania, I have a small thing. I think we need to take time to acknowledge someone, not the Prilosec OTC champion, but your favorite referee had her 2000th career match over on Thursday night or Wednesday night, I believe, on Dynamite. So Aubrey Edwards, 2000 matches in. I know you were excited. You wish you could have been there for the milestone, but
I am going to be a star and rise above the hate. So yes. Well, congratulations. 2000 matches. That's great. That's beyond AEW though, right? That's not.
Yeah. I think that's career matches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they acknowledge it on the show, or was that just something the internet came up with?
No, they acknowledged it on the show. They mentioned it. So, and then I just saw it again when I was scrolling through Blue Sky, and I was like, okay, I know you're a big fan, so I wanted to make sure we got that out there.
Yes.
But, yeah. Anyway, back to your question. No, I think John Cena will be a 17-time champion, tying Ric Flair.
Does it hurt the moment that Flair won't be there for it?
Oh, Flair said he's going to be there. I think he's going to dress up like an old lady, like Bobby Heenan did, try to get back into Raw, and
Well, I thought he said he wouldn't be there now because his affiliation with AEW.
Who knows? It's Flair. I'll rise above my petty comment as well.
There we go.
Yeah. No, again, it's such a weird milestone, and I think we've discussed it before in the show. To me, I guess one being an original Flair mark, he's the one that kind of got me into wrestling. I think his 17 titles are more prestigious than John Cena, since he was multi-company champion, and also in a time when championships were more, I don't want to necessarily say valued, but I don't think he had, with the exception of maybe one or two title reigns, didn't have the hot shotting that John Cena seemed to have early in his title runs.
Yeah.
So, and Cena was all with WWE, so
that's fair. That is fair.
Fair to Flair, man.
Fair to Flair. Well, we will do probably some kind of post WrestleMania show at some point. I actually did just find out. What's that?
In June, July, maybe.
Right before SummerSlam. No, I just found out that I am hosting. Well, as you were listening and watching this, I had hosted a WrestleMania party at PK's in Carbondale, Illinois. So on night two, for some reason we're not showing night one, but night two. So anyway, past all of the current WrestleMania talk, and we'll go back to the future, so to speak, and talk about WrestleMania in general. From a pop culture / celebrity perspective, even now in 2025, I see people bitching about the fact that Travis Scott, or even to an extent Logan Paul, that we're going to have celebrity tie-ins with WrestleMania. And to me, it's synonymous. I tried to look and see if there were ever a Mania without a celebrity, because I feel like all of them, if it wasn't even just singing of the America the Beautiful, there's always been some kind of celebrity involvement, whether they're taking a crowd shot of them or they're actually actively participating as a wrestler, as a timekeeper, as a ring announcer, someone to walk the talent to the ring, or whatever the case may be. But Chad, before we go way deep into the weeds, I want to know your overall feeling, a stance on celebrities being involved with WrestleMania and with wrestling in general, because I think everybody has picked up on it now. I even saw TNA did something at their last event where they were shouting out the celebrities in the crowd.
Yeah, on the one hand, I'm not a fan of celebrity culture,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't think you know highlighting people just for the fact that they were famous to be at a show, it doesn't. I don't know. I don't think it'll ever entice me to actually buy a show or go to a show simply for the celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand. I mean, you want to make your product look like the place to be or the thing to be doing, and so obviously you're going to want the old lady selling Wendy's hamburgers to be at your show. And I think over the years, I mean, not only just what constitutes a celebrity, but also the level of celebrity involvement. I mean, like I said, WrestleMania 2 had, I believe it was WrestleMania 2 had Clara Peller, who's where's the beef lady, and they had Herb from Burger King, which, I mean, now if you had two competing product spokespeople on a show, that would be, that would be your steel cage match normally.
There you go. They needed Ronald McDonald for the trifecta at WrestleMania 2.
Yeah, exactly. Or Jack, from Jack in the Box. So, I guess maybe 3 different locations that could have 3 different mascots. But
yeah.
No, I think also coming with age is that aspect of stop putting so much emphasis on certain aspects. We were at WrestleMania 27 when Snooki took part in a match, and the people around us were not very Snooki friendly. And I mean, I think you and our friend Travis, who was with us, we were all surprised at how well Snooki did in the ring.
Yeah.
But it's also like, who cares? Once this match is over, you can go live your life without, having anything to do with Snooki. And I mean, granted, you bring Limp Bizkit back, they're going to do it all for the Snooki, but
you're making comments and references I don't understand, so I'm not even gonna.
You don't act like you're not a Limp Bizkit fan. You didn't do it all for the Nookie.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a boomer. I'm old.
No cap on that.
No cap on that.
Need to get your Riz up, Ohio.
Well, we're going to dip into some more wrestling talk here. I was thinking about it earlier. For wrestling fans, for like real diehard wrestling fans, the celebrity is the wrestler that's performing. And I thought about it, and would I be enticed? And I'm not a big sports guy, so it's hard to. If you're going to put somebody on a talk show, then yeah, I'll watch if The Rock is going to be on late night when I normally maybe wouldn't watch that show. But if The Rock is going to be playing baseball or, a guest baseball umpire or something, am I going to be enticed to watch it? No. So I always wonder what encourages a peripheral, and maybe they're not going for fans or for people who have never watched or don't watch, because especially back in the day when it was, $39-$49 to watch WrestleMania. So I don't think anybody was necessarily paying to see Regis Philbin as a part of WrestleMania. But again, like you said, it's kind of that being in the periphery of it, and he was. And I don't know why I pulled Regis out of thin air, but that celebrity, that star is typically with WWE, it's someone that's kind of in the moment and popular at that time. I remember when they brought Jennifer Flowers out, for example, at WrestleMania 14, and why, other than the controversy that kind of surrounded it. And again, I don't think they're doing those kinds of things to get people to buy the show, but to talk about it afterward. After the fact, it shows up in the headlines, it shows up in the magazines and whatnot. And usually nowadays it's seemingly maybe a couple of hour news cycle, but back then it was usually a day or two. Entertainment Tonight, and you'd see it on maybe People Magazine or whatever the case may be, and there's a little more buzz going around it. So
yeah, definitely, it's more to get the headlines and now the clickbait to see what's out there. And again, yeah, I understand using celebrities, but other than I would say when Bad Bunny showed up and was in a match, that could have got you a few extra viewers because of Bad Bunny's involvement. But bringing in Regis or Alex Trebek or, I'm trying to think who has been there recently. Just to have them show up in the crowd or show up and host WrestleMania. Snoop Dogg, when we were there at 39, I doubt anybody came just to see Snoop, but
I wonder if he'll be there this year on Sunday, or I wonder if he was there this year on Sunday.
Oh, you don't remember when Snoop came out and he and Miz had the rematch?
Oh, no, I do remember that.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
Yeah, I see what you're doing. Okay, it'd be better if he and RVD or
you would.
Riddle had a match.
I was not surprised on night 2 when they did a skit with RVD, Godfather, and Snoop Dogg all back in the green room.
Bro, so well, I put it out there on Facebook, kind of short notice, to get people's opinions of celebrities at WrestleMania, because I think, and like you said, it kind of depends on the involvement as well. Not everybody is cut out to wrestle. I think Logan Paul, Bad Bunny was not bad when he wrestled. I think Logan Paul kind of started off as a celebrity wrestler and has turned into a pretty decent wrestler. And I guess he is contracted. I don't know exactly what his deal stipulates or whatever the case may be, but he's definitely more than a 1 or 2 act hit, if you will. But we've seen him in as ring announcers, and you mentioned Snooki, for example, and I didn't see her looking to sign on and become a full-time wrestler by any means or anything like that. But I guess let's talk about first, before we go into what our friends on Facebook are saying. And if you haven't already, joined the My 123 Cents Facebook group and follow along on the Facebook page. But, for me, none of it, the whole WrestleMania phenomenon, and I'm going to pose a question to you, a what if scenario, but I think probably, and I'm going off of memory here, I'm going to say sometime in 1984, we start seeing Cyndi Lauper appear. Captain Lou Albano was in the Girls Just Want to Have Fun video, who was obviously a manager in the WWF at the time. That crossed over. I remember seeing her on Piper's Pit. We see her involved on the cover of WWF magazine, and then she starts showing up more often. And then eventually it's the show at MSG. I don't remember if it was the War to Settle the Score or the Brawl to Settle it all, when Wendy Richter wins the championship, the women's championship from Moolah. And of course that leads then to WrestleMania, where they are also bringing along Mr. T. I would argue without Cyndi Lauper's initial involvement, we may not be sitting here today talking about WrestleMania. And I know that may sound a little over the top or over dramatic, but I think once you got her buy-in as that, and at that time, that's the MTV generation. I mean, she was everywhere. I still have She's So Unusual right here on cassette. I'm showing it off. So I think without her, and maybe it could have been someone else. Maybe it could have been Madonna or Prince or Michael Jackson or George Michael, whoever was also big at the time. But I feel like she was just that right. And then she incorporated wrestlers, the Goonies Are Good Enough music video, Nikolai Volkov and Rowdy Piper and Andre and Iron Sheik are all part of that. And I don't know where it goes. And I guess one, what is your thought on Cyndi Lauper? I think we both think that she should have been by now inducted into the celebrity wing, but who knows what's keeping that from happening. But what are your thoughts on Cyndi Lauper's initial involvement in wrestling?
No, I think Cyndi was a key part into the expansion of WWF into the mainstream. As I've said before, I didn't get MTV until either late '84 or early '85, so I didn't see the Brawl for All or the War to Settle the Score or any of that. Mm-hmm. So I had no knowledge of that because there was no internet back then, so we were clueless about things going on outside of our own little bubble. But I also think you look at that time frame. That's when WWF was starting to go more national, and I think the shows, they would run a monthly show in Madison Square Garden. It was usually, I think, the last Monday of every month. And I think Cyndi Lauper being from New York probably helped in her being able to be at shows more often. If you had, let's say, Michael Jackson, for example, who, lived out here in California, I understand that there are planes and ways to get to shows, but, mm-hmm. I don't know if it would have had the same, if they could have had the same impact or the same availability. But and like you said, that in 1984, Cyndi Lauper was a huge star. Even I'm trying to recall that time frame. I think bigger than Madonna mm-hmm. in that frame. So getting her on the show, and then like you said, with the MTV generation, getting that integration. If they don't have Cyndi Lauper, do they get MTV still? Is MTV going to partner with them to do the two specials? Or is it because, we also have this artist that, is going, that you can promote on the show. So, yeah. And I mean, not to take anything away from Mr. T, who was also big at the time, but I mean, this would be an interesting breakdown to go back and talk to all the people involved to see how things came to be throughout mm-hmm. that time frame. And I think without Cyndi Lauper, I'm not going to say I think WWF still would have succeeded just because Vince had the vision and the drive to do so. But getting Cyndi, again, when you have the top person who's popular going to this, then you get popularity by association.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up Mr. T, because I have several questions / scenarios that I want to kind of talk about and see how things would be different. And again, we're using kind of Cyndi Lauper as the antithesis for all of this kind of branching off and breaking off. So do you think WrestleMania on its own, without the main event of Hulk Hogan and Mr. T against Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, let's say that is just a tag team match and it's Hulk Hogan and Superfly Jimmy Snuka, who was arguably the number 2 guy in the company in that time period, versus Orndorff and Piper. Does it have the same appeal? Does it? Obviously, I don't see Hogan and Snuka hosting Saturday Night Live. So I think you're already, when you don't have that celebrity component, and I'm not saying Mr. T was the only celebrity at that time that could have been there, but really to me it made sense because of the A-Team and the action and just kind of that association with Rocky 3, where they're both, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T are both in that movie. It just, to me, it made sense for it to be Mr. T. It could have been anyone else, action, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Rob Van Dam, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Insert anyone else in there, but I think something made it work with Mr. T. I don't know exactly what it is, but Vince allegedly had put a lot of money into this, mortgaged the house and everything else, used money that I guess he got from the sale of the time slot on TBS from back in the day to fund WrestleMania. But is it the success it becomes? And are we talking 41 years later or 41 WrestleManias later about this event if it's not a celebrity in that main event slot? Is that, I guess what I'm getting at is that to me, that's what made it different than any other MSG
Okay.
show, because you had that celebrity component, and without it, I don't think we're here today talking about it.
Yeah. One factoid, I guess, about WrestleMania that I didn't know until this last week. Do you know why WrestleMania 1 was held at 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
I don't. I mean, I'd heard that they used to run shows during the day, but I don't know.
Because the New York Rangers had a hockey game that night at MSG.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Which, speaking of which, hockey tangent, night two, as we saw last night at night two of WrestleMania, it was going up against the Vegas Golden Knights' first playoff game of the season, of the postseason. So those crowds mingling, before and after the shows were quite, quite intriguing. To your point, this is something I've never fully understood about WrestleMania because, I've told you I watched WrestleMania 1 live because we had a satellite dish that got the MSG channel, and it was broadcast on MSG. And I don't know what MSG's reach was, if it was just in the New York area or, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, maybe. And I know it was like on closed circuit,
Right.
Which I'm not fully aware of how that works. So I never understood like how WrestleMania could really succeed or fail. I don't know how much money was put into these companies that were covering it, how much they were charging, how much money. But so by my account, WrestleMania is like, oh, if it didn't, sell out, it's just like another house show, like you said. But I mean, I think having Mr. T, Liberace, Muhammad Ali, Cyndi Lauper, I'm sure these people were getting paid, probably better than the wrestlers at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I do think you needed something to garner the attention, and I guess I'm going to be a little bit talking out of both sides of my mouth as to what I said a while ago, where, I said celebrities don't necessarily bring people in, but I think at that time, it's different. Yeah. Having Mr. T because it's more of a novelty.
Right.
I mean, I guess they did have the Gorilla Monsoon Muhammad Ali match. Again, I don't know how many people saw that or what the
right.
But saying Mr. T, and then like you said, having Hogan and T on Saturday Night Live the night before, having Cyndi Lauper on MTV, and I'm going to guess MTV was probably running ads for the show or doing news pieces on the show. Yeah, and the A-Team being as popular as it was at the time, I don't know if you would have had Stallone or Schwarzenegger or some, another action star in there. Could they have, would it have been the same? Or, I don't know. I think part of the Mr. T, Roddy Piper dynamic of the real life personalities kind of gave it some, I don't know if I want to say legitimacy, but gave it some heat.
Yeah. Well, and there's allegedly, and again, this is just based on podcasts that I've listened to. Supposedly, Vince McMahon went to the participants of the main event. I think Snuka and Bob Orton were included in this conversation, as even though they were the extras, if you will. Which, that's another scenario of it becoming a 6-man tag match instead of just the tag team. I think it was perfect the way it was, but allegedly Vince went to all of them and said, "You can get your regular payoff," which would have probably been, I guess, what, maybe a little bit better than what an MSG payoff would have been. Or if we wait and see how this goes, and the revenue comes in, you could make a hell of a lot more money. And I don't know exactly the phrasing and all that. Supposedly everyone took that, Mr. T the exception, because he was the celebrity, and like you said, the celebrities got paid more. But everyone took Vince's offer to hold out and see, what the revenue was going to be, except for Paul Orndorff. And supposedly he only got paid $12,000 for WrestleMania main event. But Piper and Hogan and the others, Snuka and Orton allegedly got paid over $100,000 for their participation in the main event. Again, I don't know how true that is. And I think, because you were talking about, money and payoffs and what if it were a success versus a failure. And And I just think that, it was a big gamble and a big risk to see, because obviously, we talk about it now today because to the victor go the spoils, but, Jim Crockett Promotions was doing closed circuit, 18 months before Vince McMahon did it with WrestleMania. Vince did it better. Obviously, it's still, a viable thing, a brand. WrestleMania is a brand now. But I wonder, because allegedly, again, when Andy Kaufman wrestled Jerry the King Lawler in Memphis back in, was it 82 or 83, obviously long before rock and wrestling and all that good stuff. But it's also before Vincent Kennedy McMahon comes in. Supposedly, this was pitched to Vincent J. McMahon in New York and the WWF, and he turned it down. He didn't. It's quite fun, not fun, but interesting to look at the differences between father and son. And Vince McMahon that we know, Mr. McMahon, had a much grander vision, I think, for this product and the branding and the marketing and the buildup of it versus what his dad did. And I think that Vince McMahon Sr. also, and I know they're not junior and senior, I'm just saying senior for the sake of argument, was against Hulk Hogan being in Rocky III. And I think that's part of the reason why they parted ways originally. And Vern Gagne. And I think if Vern had a better vision, he could have maybe capitalized on it in the AWA. We may still be talking about that today. I don't know. But I guess what I'm getting at is the opportunities that could have happened even before Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T and all of them were involved with Andy Kaufman, because you and I were kids when Andy Kaufman died, but I remember him very vividly still on Taxi and kind of being that kind of out there character. So do you think Andy Kaufman's involvement, could he have been slid into that spot of Mr. T at the first WrestleMania?
Oh, okay. Let's unpack there. First, let's go back to if we were still talking about AWA. If we got a Wrestle Rock rap every year, I'm all for it.
There you go.
And I believe, I don't know the time frame, but I think this would have been Kennedy McMahon, wasn't into Sergeant Slaughter being in G.I. Joe. And that's why.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah. I don't, until Man on the Moon, the movie came out, I was not really that familiar with Andy Kaufman.
Oh, okay.
I never watched Taxi as a kid.
Oh.
I wasn't watching Saturday Night Live when he was on there. Obviously, I wasn't watching Memphis wrestling growing up. So all of that is just like my pop culture blind spot of getting the knowledge years later.
I gotcha. Okay.
I don't think Kaufman would have. I mean, I think Kaufman could have worked in WrestleMania, but not in the Mr. T slot. I think,
I agree.
Especially given his gimmick of the intergender.
Maybe he wrestles Wendy Richter.
Maybe wrestles Wendy Richter, or that Fabulous Moolah stretching. But I mean, as we've seen, and again, 30 years later, times change. The Sami Zayn, Johnny Knoxville match from WrestleMania 38. That could have been a Andy Kaufman deal. I don't think it would have gone over as well as.
I think Johnny Knoxville dressed like Andy Kaufman, didn't he?
A little bit, yeah.
For that match, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think Andy was, from again what I have seen and learned of him, had a very kind of love-hate relationship with audiences where they didn't really get him. If they got him, they loved him, and if they didn't get him, then they're like, "What is this, guy doing out here?" So, I mean, I think had Andy lived longer than he unfortunately did, I could see him showing up later in a WrestleMania and doing something, but not. I don't think at the first WrestleMania he would have. Yeah, it worked out.
Well, and obviously we talked about the active participant aspect of it with Mr. T. Now there were other parts of that, and I feel like the first WrestleMania, because as we mentioned, and now that you said that, it makes sense because we watched it at a friend's house that had the big satellite dish, and we probably did watch it on MSG Network as well. Now looking at it in hindsight, but it was very New York based with the celebrities. Liberace and the Rockettes were there. Billy Martin, who was the manager of the Yankees, or the
Yankees.
The Yankees there in New York. I'm trying to think of the other. Muhammad Ali, of course, everybody knew who Muhammad Ali was at the time. So, but very kind of New York centric in its approach. And I think it was the right amount of celebrity at the first WrestleMania. Now, WrestleMania 2, it gets out of control. And folks, we're not going to go through every WrestleMania and talk about the celebrities, but those early years, I think it's worth noting, because they had, I think this was one of the detriments of WrestleMania 2, obviously being in three different locations. And then with three different locations, you have three different sets of commentary teams. And each one of those had a different celebrity, from Elvira to Susan St. James to Kathy Lee Crosby, which, wasn't good. You have the NFL Battle Royal, which had, I think, 7 or 8 NFL players, including William Refrigerator Perry, which I was a little surprised he didn't win that or do more in it, because it was in Chicago. He was, coming off of that big Super Bowl win with the Bears and the Super Bowl shuffle and all that good stuff. But then you have like Ozzy Osbourne and a handful of others. So, and like you mentioned, the Burger King, Herb and Clara Peller, G. Gordon Liddy from the Watergate, which, and it's funny because I learned who G. Gordon Liddy and Cab Calloway were because of WrestleMania. So it's these weird celebrities that are involved with it that kind of teaches you a thing or two too, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's weird. I keep waiting for Susan St. James to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, because that commentary is probably one of the best WrestleMania commentaries of all time.
Is she still married to Dick Ebersol?
Sure. Why not?
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just keep waiting for the Kate and Alley reboot to come along. And that's all I know of Susan St. James. But yeah, I think, another topic, another show, but WrestleMania 2, I think, was the success gets out of hand and you have to figure out how to balance things more, I think.
Yeah. And I think they did that well with WrestleMania 3 for a multitude of reasons, including the celebrity aspect of it, I think, was scaled way back.
I was going to say, other than Alice Cooper, who also should be in the Hall of Fame, I don't know. I can't recall who else was. Aretha Franklin, I guess.
Aretha Franklin sang the national anthem.
Or America the Beautiful.
Yeah. So. Was Bob Uecker not at WrestleMania? Was he at 4? I thought
he was at 4 and 4 and 5 or 3 and 4.
Yeah, I can't remember if he was at 3 and 4 or 4 or 5, 4 and 5. But to your point about Alice Cooper, what do you think about those kinds of appearances? Obviously he paired well with Jake the Snake Roberts. We mentioned Ozzy with the British Bulldogs, which personality wise, other than the fact that they're
British,
all from Britain, or British, I get that. But I do think that Jake and Alice Cooper, with the snakes and kind of the long hair and the similar looks, made sense. And you were an Alice Cooper fan long before, I'm guessing, he showed up in Detroit for WrestleMania. Yeah,
I got into Alice about a year before WrestleMania 3. It also paired up with the match. I guess Alice was the rocker, honky tonk man, the rockabilly country singer. So you had kind of a very loose tangent connection there. Yes, I was very excited when Alice was announced to be joining Jake, but again, it was coming during Alice's return to music, I guess, after dealing with his alcoholism relapse. But so he wasn't in probably the best physical shape. And I think even Jesse Ventura or Gorilla Monsoon make fun of him for, being very small. And again, look at the time and look at the wrestlers that they're comparing to. But yeah, I'm trying to think again, who else was on that card, and and I think maybe
was Mary Hart at WrestleMania 3.
I thought she was at 4 or 5. She was at, because I know she's at one of the ones with Euchre, because he does a bit about trying to. No, that's Vanna White or something. I don't know. I don't know. We should have probably pulled up a list of celebrities before we
Well,
started
you know what?
recording.
And it's funny because I did pull up a list, or I pulled
Mm.
up something on Chat GPT, which then referred me to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia says that there have only been 143 celebrity appearances at WrestleMania, which
We're going to
I
sit
feel
here and
like
name
is
them all.
really low. And they don't name them all, but
Yeah.
they, you know, that averages out to like 4 celebrities per WrestleMania, I think, or five. I don't remember. I did the math. And to me, those first 2 or 3 WrestleManias, you had, probably 20 or more
Mhm.
at WrestleMania 2 alone. So,
Well, I guess, I mean, do you count, I guess, are they counting the football players that are in the match, or are they just counting celebrity?
I thought well, maybe that, yeah, I guess I didn't read it. Yeah, Mary Hart was at WrestleMania 3. Bob Uecker,
Okay.
Mary Hart were part of the commentary and interviewers at WrestleMania.
Okay.
Um, and then Aretha Franklin and Alice Cooper were also there. So says Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But you and Dan Corley, who is a friend and follower of the My 123 Cents brand, agree on. Well, he said Alice Cooper was his all-time favorite WrestleMania celebrity. We got a handful of other ones. Bob Uecker, Mr. T, and Pete Rose, says Ken Johnson. He also says, let's not forget about the musical acts. I loved Motorhead
Mm.
playing the game's theme, Kid Rock, and Mark Crozer and the Rells. Is that I don't know I don't know who Mark
Uh,
Crozer is. I should probably know that, but
That doesn't sound familiar.
Ken will probably send me a DM after listening to this week's show. Luke Lay says, I remember all the NFL players in the Battle Royal at WrestleMania 2 making national news. This was before I started watching religiously, so it must have made an impression on me. So he remembers that. Dalton Anthony, our friend from many years, says Cyndi Lauper, there is no other option. And then Bull Bronson, who says that Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow was awesome. And I feel like, and we'll kind of segue into that as well, because obviously WrestleMania, the first one, has the Mr. T involvement. We're not really sure. We're kind of laying the groundwork here. And then 2, I don't really count the battle royal with the NFL players, but obviously that had the celebrity involvement. But I don't think it's until WrestleMania 11, many years later, where we get Lawrence Taylor, LT, former NFL great, involved in WrestleMania in the main event. Actually, it closes the show. Which is another sign of the times, I think, where one of the very few WrestleManias that ends with a non-title, non-championship, maybe the only WrestleMania without a champion in the match itself. We'll have to go back and do some research on that. But, I think WWE was looking for someone to kind of get a shot in the arm, if you will. He obviously had several football players in his corner, LT did, one of them being Steve Mongo McMichael, who I think later that year, because he ends up on commentary for Nitro, 6 months later. So he obviously gets involved in wrestling after that as well. But what were you thinking? Because we're college age by this point. What were you thinking when LT shows up? Did you know anything about him? I knew he was a player, but I knew nothing about LT until seeing him kind of on this stage.
Yeah, I didn't really. I mean, I'm with you. I knew he was a football player, and I don't know. I don't know if he'd had any run-ins with the law at that point, or drug bust. At the time, I don't recall. But like you said, I was in college at this point, so I really wasn't watching as we on the weekly front because I didn't have cable. So and obviously didn't order the pay-per-view. But I think it's interesting to look at that time frame in WWE because, like you said, you main event with LT, you have Pamela Anderson and Jenny McCarthy who were there. This is kind of the downturn in business for WWF. So were they just trying to get a lot of celebrities? Salt and Peppa played LT to the ring. Were they trying to get the star power to be the draw over the wrestlers that weren't drawing at the time?
Yeah, business definitely was kind of in the shitter, and it was not as what it would become just a couple of years later. And ironically enough, and I want your take on this. Mike Tyson, he was supposed to be the guest referee between Hogan and Savage on the main event in 1990. He gets knocked out the week before by Buster Douglas in Japan. I remember, sidetrack here, but in my hometown, and I'm sure like other Midwest small hometowns, you would go cruising and drive around parking lots of various businesses. And there was a movie theater and restaurant complex, probably 10 or 15 miles from where I live. But all the high schools, that's where the kids went. And literally, you're just driving around in the big rectangle or square around this parking lot, and you'd stop and try to mac on some girls and get rejected and all that good. Well,
it's also when gas was affordable.
Exactly. Gas was like 70 cents a gallon. So anyway,
we're old.
Yeah, exactly. We were out that night doing that, and I can remember coming home and like it was breaking news on the radio that Mike Tyson had gotten knocked out in Japan by Buster Douglas, and nobody knew who the hell Buster Douglas was. And then, of course, he ends up replacing Mike Tyson on the main event in that scenario. So I'm saying all that to get to the point that 8 years later, Mike Tyson, he goes through all of his stuff. He bites Evander Holyfield's ear. He goes to prison for the rape. Does his time and is back out. And WWE, in my opinion, takes a big gamble because this is right after they let Bret Hart go because they didn't have the money to pay him his 20-year contract. And, they lean into Mike Tyson, which was a multi-million-dollar deal, I'm sure. And it paid off. It kind of, I think the Attitude Era was already starting, but I think that Monday Night Raw where Tyson is in the ring nose to nose with Austin, the realism with Austin and that whole scenario, it worked. And I think it ignited, and I think it really kicked off fandom for a lot of people who weren't maybe necessarily, they were, by this point, I'm in my early 20s, and some of my friends who had gone away from wrestling years earlier started watching again because they're like, Mike Tyson is here. And then, of course, WCW had the NWO and Dennis Rodman and Goldberg. And, so it's two big firestorms brewing against each other. But I think that Mike Tyson and I would even say on the other side of the channel, Dennis Rodman, those guys brought in that casual fan or that lapsed fan and really made it something. And I was a little surprised that Tyson didn't wrestle, but I think, being the referee, it was effective. It worked and it served its purpose.
Yeah. Especially with the outcome of I still don't fully understand why he was DX until he wasn't DX in the match. But yeah, Tyson's popularity, and again, I guess it's more of a social, not construction, but criticism, if you will. Like if you look at celebrities that get a pass, so to speak, on their behavior and everything and say, okay, yeah, we could still be fans, we could still applaud them. Tyson is one of those guys that, unfortunately, given his history, you would think would be shunned and would be everything, but fans don't seem to care. And so, he's a popular guy. AEW invites him to come on and fall asleep at one of their early shows. So, but yeah, even though he wasn't the heavyweight champion at the time, and given everything that got on, Tyson was still a major get for WWE, and his interactions with DX and with Austin, and I'm trying to remember if he showed up at the PR event a couple days before WrestleMania.
I think that's where they tied Austin up in the ropes and Mike kissed him on the forehead.
Okay, yeah.
I think that was the press conference leading into Mania. So yeah, I think he
was. So Tyson was a huge, and I think it's again goes back to, do you want to be with the cool kids or the people that try to be cool. And I know that the timeline on this, what I'm about to say, that doesn't line up exactly. But would you rather be with DX and Mike Tyson, or do you want to be with old Hogan and Jay Leno?
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I am not. I'm saying this because I don't want people to be like, well, why didn't they talk about this? But I'm also not talking about it. I'm piggybacking off of your behavior comment about Mike Tyson, and that's Donald Trump. Obviously 4 and 5. We've talked about WrestleMania 4 and 5 a couple of times now. It's the first year that they do back-to-back venue at Trump Tower in Atlantic City. So he's in the crowd. I don't think he really had much involvement other than being in the crowd. But then years later, the battle of the billionaires between Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, and the whole thing with, we were at the Monday Night Raw where they do the parody of Rosie O'Donnell versus Donald Trump. So obviously Donald Trump, a big part of the WrestleMania history, being involved with those events. And I think he even was interviewed at WrestleMania 20 at MSG by Jesse Ventura. And they talked about Jesse being the one to be in the White House, but ironically, it ends up being Donald Trump. But did you ever for a second think that Donald Trump was going to get shaved bald at the WrestleMania 23 Battle of the Billionaires? It would have been funny for sure, but I don't. And it's funny that he was the baby face in that scenario, and Vince is the bad guy. So.
Never. You expect Vince to, show ass, as they say, in that situation, and I don't think if Vince would have, I doubt Vince even floated the suggestion of Trump losing his hair. Because he's got that great, that hair, like no one has hair that great like Donald Trump has. So, but again, it's just interesting to see, and you look back at WrestleMania 4 and 5, and Donald Trump wasn't really a celebrity megastar, let's say. I'm currently reading a book about the summer of 1984 in sports. And it's when Trump bought into the USFL that was going on at the time, because he tried to buy an NFL team. But the book says he was a New York celebrity, but it wasn't really until 84, 85 that he became the national celebrity. I'm trying to think back watching 4 and 5, if I even knew who Donald Trump, it's just it's the guy that owns the casino. Okay, cool. I'm more interested in Mary Tyler Moore, who's sitting 3 seats down, and I didn't even know who she was at the time. So
what? You did too.
I mean, I knew she was an actress on the show, but I didn't watch Mary Tyler Moore as a kid.
Dick Van Dyke Show?
No, I was a kid. That was in black and white.
Oh my God. And you call yourself a nerd. And Mary Tyler Moore, I think, was at WrestleMania 6, not WrestleMania 5.
Yeah, whatever. So, she was sitting there. I'm sure if you go back and look at the video, maybe they didn't talk to her. It's going to be like this year. It was like when the Pod Meets World went to the Netflix debut, and Will Friedle was called seat number 43 or whatever it was. Hopefully that play into that, because I'm going to guess they were at WrestleMania this week, because I know they're in Vegas and they're doing the shows from there, but I don't know. I think it's on their own accord. It's not anything tied in with WWE.
I'm trying to think, other than, so we've had Mr. T, the NFL players. We've had Lawrence Taylor, Snooki. What other celebrities? I feel like I'm missing someone, and I'm sure I am, and people will correct us in the future. Maria Menounos, I guess, from Entertainment Tonight, wrestled at one of those WrestleManias as well. Have there been any other celebrities that had matches at WrestleMania that we're forgetting or that we're missing?
Let me think.
Chad's going to pop it into his Google machine, and because like we said, we've obviously had the guest managers, the guest ring announcers, the timekeepers, and all that good stuff. But and I guess I'm we talked about Bad Bunny and Logan Paul earlier in the show too, of course. But do you think this year, you know, I think it was probably on Conrad's podcast, one of his podcasts, had talked about Randy Orton, and again, we're recording post WrestleMania or pre WrestleMania. So who knows who ended up being Randy Orton's opponent. But one of the scenarios that I heard was, because there's a hip hop and celebrity culture at WrestleMania. What if it was a bunch of those guys just jumping in the ring and getting RKO'd and knocked out of the ring? Again, it's that headline, that post-Mania headline, that buzz, that social media frenzy, if you will, for at least a few hours or maybe a few days. But I can't. I'm racking my brain. Did you find anyone else that actually wrestled at a WrestleMania?
Well, I forgot about Colin Jost and Michael Che.
Oh yeah,
Andre Battle Royal.
Was that the one we were at, or was that?
No, that was the second time they went back to New York.
Okay.
Let's see.
And I guess Shaq was in one of those battle royals.
Yeah. We were there for this one. Money Mayweather.
Oh, of course. I've got the chair sitting right behind me here. Yeah, that was another one of those where, again, not a big sports fan. I know the big names, but I didn't know who Floyd Mayweather was until they kind of brought him in and started talking about him. And that was another one of those. I guess here's another point of talking, because with the exception of the Battle Royal at WrestleMania, I can't think of a time where a celebrity didn't win. And I know Mr. T didn't get the pinfall at WrestleMania, which I don't think he needed to, but seemingly, and I don't remember if Snooki was the one that scored the pin for her team or Maria Menounos for that matter, but it seems like I can't think of a scenario where a celebrity has come up on the losing end, except maybe the year with WCW when it was Karl Malone and DDP against Hulk Hogan and Dennis Rodman. Obviously, someone had to lose that one, but I feel like for the most part, the celebrity wins. So does that take anything away? Because I remember at the time in 2008, I had very strong feelings about Mayweather beating Big Show. But now, many years later, and after thinking about it and obviously different perspectives of it, who cares? First of all, but then ultimately, you're bringing in this celebrity to kind of get some, to me, it's a bigger headline on SportsCenter or TMZ or whatever to say that, 150-pound Floyd Mayweather beat 7'4", 500-pound Big Show than, to say the opposite, so that obviously adds to the cachet, into that furthering the publicity, mainstream media publicity too. So do you care either way if the celebrity goes over and wins? I mean, I kind of looking back on Stride Pro Wrestling, when I was wrestling and stuff, I should have never been in there doing that, but I definitely shouldn't have been winning anything. But again, you get there and you're telling these stories. So I don't have a problem when the celebrity shows up and gets the win and does a little bit of the shine there.
Yeah. I mean, now that I can bet on wrestling, I want my sports to be more legitimate in their win-losses. But no, again, it's storytelling. You kind of, I don't know, but you figure if they're bringing in a celeb, they're going to go over, because again, that's going to get the better headlines.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, is it a point of sacrificing some of your own talent at the expense of that? Probably. But we've said, many times, it's like bringing in The Rock or Goldberg, these part-time wrestlers, and then giving them the title and putting them over your stars that are there week after week. It's just part of the business, unfortunately. So,
yeah.
And again, as long as it's not the matches we've listed, LT, Snooki, Bad Bunny, other than Mr. T, no one's really been, and I know LT was in the quote unquote main event, but it hasn't been a major star that they've been fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, you need that, like, for example, at 11,
Mhm.
the talent roster was kind of depleted. There were some of the stories just weren't very
Mhm.
good. And so bringing in that guy for Bam Bam Bigelow to wrestle and finding that right opponent, I think
Mhm.
sometimes becomes part of it. Because originally at WrestleMania, we talked about Muhammad Ali's involvement, and he was supposed to be the referee, and he was the outside referee. And
Mhm.
I never really clicked with me until talking with Stride. And, with Stride, we would do some of the matches with teachers. If we were at a school fundraiser, you'd have
Mhm.
the wrestlers in there with the teachers. And usually Tyler, if he wasn't wrestling in that match, he was refereeing it because they can kind of help direct traffic. And that's why Pat Patterson was put into the guest referee spot in
Mhm.
that main event, because and I don't think Mr. T was going to necessarily struggle, but you had someone in there that knew kind of that fourth man in the ring, or in this case, or the fifth man in the ring in this case, is there to kind of direct traffic. So it's always fun and interesting to me to see. And like I said, did you find any other celebrities that actually wrestled at Mania? So that it is a
No.
pretty small list then.
Yeah.
So
Yep. So, oh well, there's always next year for you. You
there you
can.
go. Well, as we wrap up, Chad, did you have anyone other than is Alice Cooper your all time favorite? Like, I guess, tell me your favorite celebrity to be at WrestleMania, and then maybe if the role, because Alice Cooper's role was what it was, but
Was manager, yeah. Well, you put me on the spot because even though I just read, I mean, from a personal standpoint, Alice Cooper's my favorite. Just huge fan. I'm trying to think of ones that have been involved. Uh, this is going to be the one that I'm going to kind of piggyback off of your kind of disclaimer before.
mm-hmm.
I'm saying this, and I'm not trying to be in any way political minded, but the fact that the sitting president was involved with WrestleMania and is a WWE Hall of Famer amuses me in a way that I can't fully explain. It's just what it is, and I never would have thought, 40 years ago, if you would have told me, hey, one day, I mean, even if it had been Jesse Ventura, who,
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, if Glenn Jacobs goes on to be bigger than mayor of Knox County, it's like I never would have expected wrestlers to be in these high profile political positions. But so for that fact, I'm going to go, yes, with Donald Trump, just, uh, being there. And actually, again, don't know if he understands that it's a work.
Oh. Understandable. Well, I'm looking, because I kind of put myself on the spot with that question too, and I really, I think, and I guess we failed to mention Mr. T was part of WrestleMania 2 as well, with the boxing match with Rowdy
Less said,
Roddy
the
Piper.
better.
Yeah, so I agree with you on that. I do think, for nostalgia purposes, I go back to that first Mania, and again, between Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T's involvement, I don't think we are where we are today with it. So for those reasons, I'll go with those two as being two of my favorites. But I'm sure, had I sat down and been more thoughtful and prepared a list, I'd have a different lineup here. But
well, let me ask you this: next year, WrestleMania 42, what celebrity would you like to see involved?
Well, if I want my wife to watch it with me, when I told her earlier today that WrestleMania is 2 nights, and she was like, "Well, that sucks." I would say Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, or now she's captivated by Selena Gomez, and I don't know who she's
Blanco.
Benny Blanco. So yeah, if we could work those guys, and actually last year for WrestleMania 40, when we were watching, I said Jason Kelce is, because she likes the Kelce guys. I'm like, Jason Kelce is going to be involved with this in somehow. And then when they came in and jumped in and stuff, she stopped scrolling on TikTok for a minute and looked up and kind of had a laugh with it. So, so yeah, and speaking of that, not to get totally sidetracked, but she listens to their podcast and is a fan of them and obviously Taylor Swift. But I went back and listened to their podcast when they talked about the WrestleMania thing, because I was curious just to kind of hear what their perspective of it was and whatever. So, but yeah, I think, the celebrity involvement, we've gone from Herb and Clara Peller to like legitimate Super Bowl champions and prize fighters in boxing and like you said, future presidents of the United States. So it is an interesting evolution, not only the in-ring talent, but I think the celebrities they attract and bring into. And I think a lot of these folks are fans, which we've talked about before too.
And I think that's a big thing too.
Yeah, a fan being involved versus someone being there, like maybe a Jenny McCarthy or a Jenny Garth, that were there to get paid their appearance fee or whatever the case may be. So I think that goes a long way as well.
I agree. So I'm hoping, and I mean, we obviously, I should say, I know this happened or didn't happen. If Macaulay Culkin shows up at WrestleMania, because he has showed up at 2 Raws this year, and the crowd goes nuts. And he was at WrestleMania 7. Surely, if he's at least open to it, WWE's got to get him on some type of appearance at a major show.
I could see Kevin Owens versus Kevin McAllister at WrestleMania 42. All right, Chad, anything else you want to say before we wrap up this week's episode?
No, I think we've said it all. It's just, I will kind of echo your wife's sentiment. I still don't think WrestleMania needs to be 2 nights. And I will say, again, we're recording this the Friday before WrestleMania. I have a bit of FOMO going on. If things were different, I'm going to say that I thought about just flying over to Vegas for at least on Saturday and checking out things, but I doubt that will happen now. And I'm kind of disappointed next year is back in New Orleans, which we've been to. It's like, but hopefully before we start collecting Social Security, we'll make it back to another Mania. So.
Absolutely. Well, friends, thanks for watching and or listening to this week's episode. Leave us your thoughts in the comments on celebrities at WrestleMania. You can also leave your thoughts on the show itself. We will see you next time.